Ladies and gentlemen, when you stop talking to him, everything changes. And not just for you, but for him too. Silence is not empty. Silence is loud. Silence is a message that says, access denied. And when that access is gone, a man starts to feel what your presence was really worth. Silence sends a stronger message than repeated explanations or arguments, because words can be ignored, debated, twisted, or delayed. But silence creates a space that cannot be negotiated away. When you keep explaining how you feel, what you need, and why something hurts, the other person can nod, promise, postpone, or defend themselves. Conversation gives room for excuses. Repetition lowers urgency. The more you explain, the more your pain risks sounding like background noise instead of a signal. But silence removes the comfort of negotiation. It takes away the easy replies and the quick fixes. There is no argument to win against silence, no point to counter, no emotion to label as overreacting. The absence of your voice forces attention in a way raised voices often fail to do. It creates contrast. What used to be constant is suddenly gone, and the human mind is wired to notice loss faster than presence. When someone is used to long messages, quick replies, emotional availability, and patient clarification, they unconsciously begin to rely on it. It becomes part of their emotional environment. They don't analyze it because they don't have to. It's simply there. Silence interrupts that pattern. It breaks emotional predictability. And broken patterns demand interpretation. Repeated arguments often turn into cycles. The same issue, different day, similar words, familiar frustration. Over time, the listener prepares defenses before you finish speaking. They predict your points and mentally mute your delivery. Silence disrupts that defensive preparation. There is nothing to prepare for. The mind starts asking questions instead of building shields. Silence also protects dignity. When emotions are high, people often over-explain, over-defend, and overexpose their vulnerability to someone who is not ready to handle it with care. Quiet distance keeps your self-respect intact. It prevents your feelings from being handled carelessly in the heat of reaction. It turns emotional energy inward instead of scattering it outward. Most people expect noise when there is conflict, messages, calls, emotional paragraphs, visible frustration. When they receive calm quiet instead, it feels heavier, not because it is louder, but because it is intentional. It suggests a decision has been made internally, not just an emotion expressed externally. It signals that persuasion has ended and evaluation has begun. He first feels disbelief, then curiosity, then emotional discomfort, because sudden silence interrupts the expectations he quietly built around your presence. When communication has been consistent, the mind treats it like a guarantee rather than a gift. Your messages, reactions, and responses become part of his normal rhythm. So when that rhythm stops, his first reaction is not pain, but doubt. He assumes there must be a simple explanation. Maybe you are busy, tired, distracted, or proving a small point. Disbelief acts like a buffer that protects his ego from immediate impact. In that disbelief stage, he doesn't adjust his behavior yet. He waits. He checks casually instead of urgently. He tells himself there is no need to react because things will return to normal on their own. This is where habit shows itself. He expects access without effort because access has always been available. The silence feels temporary in his mind, like a paused conversation rather than a closed door. When the pause stretches longer than expected, disbelief turns into curiosity. Curiosity is more active. Now he starts looking for clues. He rereads past conversations, reviews the last interaction, measures his last words. He watches your online activity, your posting patterns, your response to others. the mind begins building. Theories. Curiosity is the stage where attention increases, but vulnerability is still hidden behind analysis. Curiosity carries a quiet tension because unanswered questions create mental loops. Humans prefer even negative certainty over uncertain distance. Not knowing why the silence exists becomes more uncomfortable than hearing a complaint. He may feel the urge to reach out indirectly, test the waters, or create a reason to restart contact without admitting concern. Pride and interest begin to compete. When curiosity fails to produce clarity, emotional discomfort arrives. This is the turning point. The absence is no longer intellectual. It becomes personal. He feels the missing interaction in small daily moments. When something happens and there is no one to tell, when a joke has no familiar receiver, when a thought has nowhere to land. Emotional discomfort is not always dramatic. Often it is subtle and persistent, like pressure rather than pain. This is where emotional reality replaces assumption. He doesn't just notice the silence. He feels its weight in routine, attention, and emotional availability that used to come without request. Ego may make him act unbothered, but absence forces reflection because pride is often the first shield people raise when they feel emotionally exposed. When contact stops and he senses the shift, his instinct may be to protect his image before he examines his feelings. Instead of admitting confusion or concern, he performs indifference. He appears extra relaxed, extra social, extra occupied. This reaction is not always calculated. It is often automatic. Ego prefers performance over vulnerability. In this phase, behavior can become louder on the outside while uncertainty grows quietly inside. He may increase his visibility, show more activity, emphasize independence, or highlight alternatives. The goal of ego is to restore control of the narrative. If he can look unaffected, he can avoid feeling rejected. If he can look desired, he can avoid feeling replaced. But performance requires an audience, and when the one person he expected to notice is no longer responding, the performance loses its target. Acting unbothered takes energy. Maintaining emotional distance on purpose is work. The mind must repeatedly suppress the impulse to check, ask, or admit missing the connection. Suppression creates pressure. Pressure creates thought. And thought, when uninterrupted by constant conversation, turns inward. Absence removes distraction. Without your steady interaction, there are fewer emotional buffers in his day. No quick reassurance, no familiar response, no predictable emotional exchange. That empty space becomes reflective space. Moments that used to be filled now echo. Reflection rarely begins with deep insight. It starts with small recognitions. He notices habits that formed around you. He notices how often he expected understanding without offering equal effort. Ego says, don't reach out first. Reflection asks, why did things change? Ego says, it doesn't matter. Reflection asks, if it didn't matter, why do I keep thinking about it? That internal dialogue grows stronger when silence continues. Without new input, the brain reviews old memory. Tone, timing, missed chances, dismissed concerns. Details return with sharper edges. True reflection is uncomfortable because it removes easy blame. It highlights contribution, not just consequence. He begins to see not only what happened, but how he responded when it mattered. Not only what you said, but how often he minimized it. Reflection is slow, private, and difficult to fake, and it keeps expanding in the quiet left behind by your absence. Your quiet distance reveals your true value more than constant availability. Because when someone has unlimited access to your time, attention, and care, it becomes easy to take it for granted. When you are always present, always responding, always accommodating, Your presence blends into the background. It becomes expected rather than appreciated. People rarely notice the effort behind consistency until it is interrupted. Constant availability hides the worth of what is offered because it appears effortless, and humans often underestimate what feels ordinary. When you pull back even slightly, the contrast between absence and presence becomes clear. Small gestures that were once routine, a text, a call, a check-in, a shared laugh, suddenly carry weight. Silence highlights the emotional labor you invested over time, the patience you showed, the understanding you extended, and the space you carved for someone else in your life. What was once unnoticed begins to shine because absence creates perspective. The mind can now see the pattern of care without being distracted by its constant execution. Quiet distance also demonstrates boundaries, which are a crucial signal of self-respect. When your attention is not freely available, it forces the other person to evaluate how they treated it before. They start noticing how much effort you gave and how little acknowledgement or reciprocity they offered. The reality of your worth is revealed in the scarcity of your presence. Absence naturally teaches appreciation, while constant availability risks fostering complacency. Moreover, pulling back removes the illusion that your engagement is guaranteed. When someone perceives your presence as optional rather than automatic, it triggers reflection and assessment. They begin to realize what they are missing, what they took for granted, and how little effort they put into maintaining the eighth. E-connection. It becomes harder to ignore patterns of neglect or moments of indifference when your attention is no longer a constant safety net. The quiet distance also amplifies the emotional impact of your value. It is no longer your words or explanations that communicate your importance, but the simple fact that your presence matters. People often understand the depth of care they received not when it is being given, but when it is withheld. It is the emptiness, the lack of routine interaction, the absence of attention that forces recognition of the true weight of your presence in their life. Finally, distance allows your own self-worth to be affirmed internally. By stepping back, you signal that you do not need validation from constant interaction, that your value is inherent, not dependent on others noticing it. This balance of self-respect and selective engagement makes your presence even more significant when it is returned to the space, and it transforms what was once taken for granted into something genuinely missed and recognized. When you stop chasing, the dynamic flips, and thinking begins because the pursuit itself often masks the reality of how someone truly values you. When a person is accustomed to constant attention, repeated messages, or persistent effort, they begin to treat it as a baseline rather than a gift. Your pursuit becomes a habit for them, a predictable element in their life that doesn't require introspection. They may feel secure in your availability, assuming that no matter what they do, your energy and focus will return. Chasing can create comfort for them, but it prevents clarity for both of you. Once you stop chasing, the automatic expectation disappears. They can no longer rely on your consistent reach, your repeated calls, or your attempts to bridge distance. The absence of effort is jarring. It removes the cushion that allowed them to overlook neglect, disinterest, or inconsistency. Suddenly, the behavior they once ignored or minimized becomes obvious. Your silence is not empty. It is a mirror reflecting their own actions back to them. Without your pursuit, there is no buffer, no distraction, no way to avoid the truth of the situation. As the dynamic flips, they start to evaluate their own role. They may initially resist admitting it, hiding behind pride, busyness, or indifference. But the quiet forces questions. Why am I not hearing from them? Did I take them for granted? Did I fail to notice how much they cared? These questions emerge because absence creates space that presence often fills, and thinking is inevitable when habitual patterns are interrupted. The very act of stepping back compels self-reflection in a way that words or confrontation rarely can. Stopping the chase also shifts control. When you are always pursuing, the other person unconsciously holds the advantage. They can respond or not respond without consequence. Measure effort against their convenience, and maintain emotional comfort at your expense. When you withdraw, that advantage disappears. Control moves back toward you. The dynamic is no longer one-sided. The balance changes, and with it, the need for awareness and recognition on their part becomes unavoidable. Finally, this shift teaches both parties about value, patience, and accountability. It highlights who is willing to step forward when access is no longer guaranteed, who takes the initiative, and who realizes too late what was lost. The absence of pursuit transforms the relationship from habitual interaction to conscious engagement, forcing reflection, evaluation, and often a newfound understanding of what was previously overlooked.